The 15,000-seat arena fell into deathly silence. Elvis Presley had stopped mid-song, tears visible in his eyes as he stared at the uniformed young man at the edge of the stage. What happened in the next few minutes would become one of the most beautiful moments in music history, but to understand why the king of rock and roll abandoned his show, we need to go back to how this extraordinary night began. It was March 15, 1974, at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis, Tennessee. Elvis was performing his Good Times tour, and the energy in his hometown arena was electric. Fans had traveled from across the country to see their idol, and Elvis was in peak form that night, his white jumpsuit sparkling under the stage lights as he moved through his classic repertoire. But among the screaming fans and devoted followers sat 19-year-old Private James Mitchell, a young soldier on a brief leave from Fort Campbell before his deployment to Southeast Asia. James wasn't like the other fans that night. He sat quietly near the front, his military dress uniform crisp and proper, but his eyes carried a weight that seemed far too heavy for someone his age. Earlier that week, James had received devastating news. His younger brother Tommy, who had been battling leukemia for 2 years, had taken a turn for the worse. The doctors gave Tommy perhaps days, maybe a week at most. James had spent his last dollars on a ticket to see Elvis, not for entertainment, but for something deeper. His brother Tommy was Elvis's biggest fan, and James hoped somehow to get close enough to get an autograph, maybe a photo, something to take back to his dying brother. Subscribe now because what happens next will show you why Elvis Presley was more than just an entertainer. Elvis was in the middle of performing It's Now or Never when something made him pause. As he reached the emotional crescendo of the song, his eyes swept across the audience and landed on James. There was something about the young soldier's expression, the way he sat so still while everyone around him swayed and cheered, that caught Elvis's attention. The king stopped singing. The arena fell into deathly silence as 15,000 people watched Elvis lower his microphone, his eyes locked on the young man in uniform. "Hold on just a minute, folks," Elvis said into the microphone, his voice softer than usual. "I see a young soldier out there, and something tells me he's got something heavy on his heart." James felt his face flush as thousands of eyes turned toward him. He started to sink lower in his seat, but Elvis was already walking to the edge of the stage, still holding his microphone. "Son, what's your name?" Elvis asked gently. "Private James Mitchell, sir," James replied, his voice barely audible. "James, you look like you're carrying the weight of the world. Is everything all right?" And then something happened that no one expected. This tough young soldier, trained to hide emotion, began to break down. "My brother, he's dying, sir. He's only 14, and he's your biggest fan. I came here hoping. I don't know what I was hoping." Elvis didn't hesitate. He set down his microphone, sat on the edge of the stage, and gestured for James to come closer. "Come up here, son. Come up here right now." Security moved to stop James, but Elvis waved them off. "Let him through. Let him through right now." James climbed onto the stage, overwhelmed and shaking. Elvis put his arm around the young soldier's shoulders and picked up his microphone again. "Folks, this is Private James Mitchell. He's about to serve our country overseas, and his little brother is fighting a battle that's a lot tougher than anything James will face." "What's your brother's name, son?" "Tommy, sir. Tommy Mitchell." Elvis nodded and turned to the massive crowd. "I want everyone here to help me send a message to Tommy Mitchell. Can you do that?" The roar from the crowd was deafening. But what Elvis did next left everyone in the arena speechless, because no one expected what was about to happen. Elvis reached into his pocket and pulled out one of his signature scarves, the kind he would normally throw into the crowd during his performances. But instead of tossing it, he carefully folded it and placed it in James's hands. "This isn't just any scarf, James. This is from my very first performance at the Louisiana Hayride in 1954. I've kept it with me for 20 years, and I want you to take it to Tommy." James stared at the scarf in disbelief. "Sir, I can't take this. This must be worth. It's not worth anything to me if it's sitting in a drawer. But it might mean everything to your brother." Elvis's voice cracked slightly. "I lost my mother when I was young, James. I know what it's like to feel helpless when someone you love is suffering." Then Elvis did something that transformed the entire atmosphere of the arena. He turned to his band and nodded. "Boys, let's do 'Love Me Tender' for Tommy." As the gentle melody began, Elvis started singing, but this time he wasn't performing for the crowd. He was singing for a dying 14-year-old boy he'd never met, and for his brother who loved him enough to spend his last dollars on a ticket to a concert. The most incredible part of this story was still to come, and no one in that arena could have predicted what would happen next. As Elvis sang, something magical occurred. The entire crowd of 15,000 people began singing along, their voices joining together in a chorus that seemed to rise straight to heaven. James stood there, tears streaming down his face, clutching the scarf while the king of rock and roll serenaded his dying brother. But Elvis wasn't finished. He stopped singing and turned to James again. "Is there anything else Tommy loves? Anything that might bring him some joy?" James hesitated, then said, "He plays guitar, sir. He's been learning your songs, but the treatment makes his fingers too weak sometimes." Elvis walked over to his guitar tech and returned with one of his acoustic guitars. "This is a 1957 Martin D-28, the same model I used to record 'That's All Right.' I want Tommy to have it." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Elvis raised his hand for silence. "James, I'm going to give you something else. My personal phone number. You call me and let me know how Tommy's doing. And if the worst happens, you call me immediately. A young man who loves music that much deserves to have someone remember him." James could barely speak. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me, son. You're about to go serve our country. That's thanks enough." Elvis embraced the young soldier, then addressed the crowd one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for Private James Mitchell and his brother Tommy." The standing ovation lasted nearly 10 minutes, but the real impact of this moment was only beginning. James returned to his seat, guitar in one hand, scarf in the other, as Elvis continued his concert. But something had changed in the arena. The performance had become something deeper, more meaningful. Every song Elvis sang that night carried an extra emotional weight, as if the encounter with James had reminded everyone present of what really mattered. 2 days later, James sat beside Tommy's hospital bed, placing the guitar gently in his brother's weak hands and wrapping Elvis's scarf around his neck. Tommy's eyes, though dim from medication, lit up with a joy that doctors said wasn't medically possible given his condition. "Elvis really gave this to me," Tommy whispered. "He sang 'Love Me Tender' just for you, little brother." The whole crowd sang along. Tommy managed to strum a few chords on the guitar, playing the opening notes to 'That's All Right.' For the first time in weeks, he smiled genuinely. 3 days later, Tommy Mitchell passed away peacefully in his sleep, clutching Elvis's scarf and with his new guitar beside his bed. James called the number Elvis had given him, expecting to reach an assistant or manager. Instead, Elvis himself answered the phone. "James. How's Tommy doing, son?" Through tears, James told Elvis that his brother had died, but that his final days had been filled with joy because of the guitar and scarf. There was a long pause before Elvis spoke again. "James, Tommy's not really gone. Every time someone plays music with love, every time someone reaches out to help another person, Tommy's still here. That guitar isn't just an instrument anymore. It's a reminder that kindness is the most important thing we can give each other." Elvis kept in touch with James throughout his military service, and their friendship lasted until Elvis's own death in 1977. Share this story and subscribe if you believe in the power of human kindness, because what happened next shows how one moment of compassion can echo through generations. But before James left for overseas duty, something else remarkable happened. Elvis had given him his personal phone number that night, and 3 weeks later, James received an unexpected call. "James. It's Elvis. I've been thinking about Tommy and about you, son." James was stunned. The king of rock and roll was calling him personally. "I've talked to my manager, Colonel Parker, and we want to do something special. We're going to dedicate my next album to Tommy. But more than that, I want to set up a scholarship fund for kids who love music but can't afford instruments or lessons." That phone call led to the establishment of what would become the Elvis Presley Foundation for Young Musicians, with Tommy Mitchell as its first honoree. Elvis didn't just make a public announcement about it, he quietly funded music programs in children's hospitals across the South, ensuring that every child fighting illness would have access to instruments and music therapy. But the most incredible part of this expanding legacy was still unfolding behind the scenes. During James's first tour overseas, he received packages every month, not from family, but from Graceland. Elvis had instructed his staff to send care packages not just to James, but to his entire unit. Inside were harmonicas, small guitars, and handwritten notes from Elvis encouraging the soldiers to keep music alive even in the darkest places. Word spread among the troops about the soldier whose encounter with Elvis had sparked this ongoing generosity. James became known as the Elvis Guy, and his tent became an impromptu music center where homesick soldiers would gather to sing songs and share stories from home. When James returned from his first deployment, he found that Elvis had been busy. The singer had visited children's hospitals in Memphis, Nashville, and Little Rock, bringing guitars and spending hours with young patients. He never publicized these visits, they were purely personal missions of compassion inspired by Tommy's story. James Mitchell went on to serve 2 tours of duty overseas, carrying a photo of himself with Elvis and always wearing a small piece of that sacred scarf on his uniform. When he returned home, he established the Tommy Mitchell Music Foundation, providing instruments to children in hospitals. The guitar Elvis gave to Tommy was never sold. Instead, it became the centerpiece of a music therapy program at St. Jude Children's Hospital, where young patients learned to play the same songs that brought Tommy joy in his final days. In 1997, 23 years after that night in Memphis, James returned to the Mid-South Coliseum for an Elvis tribute concert. He brought his own son, Tommy Mitchell Jr., named after his uncle he never got to meet. As the tribute artist performed "Love Me Tender," James pulled out a small piece of Elvis's scarf, now frayed and faded, and placed it in his son's hand. "Your Uncle Tommy and a man called Elvis taught me something important," James told his son. "Fame, money, success, none of that matters if you don't use it to lift other people up." Elvis could have just signed an autograph and moved on. Instead, he gave away a piece of his history and created a moment that changed our entire family. But there was one more secret James had never shared publicly until that tribute concert night. Standing in the same arena where his life had changed decades earlier, James revealed something that had remained hidden for over 2 decades. On the night Tommy died, as James sat beside his brother's bed holding Elvis's guitar, Tommy had whispered something that James thought was just the medication talking. "The music man came to see me," Tommy had said weakly. "He sat right here and played 'Love Me Tender' just for me. He said the scarf would keep me safe, and when I'm ready, I can go to the place where music never ends." James had dismissed it as a hallucination until he received a phone call from Elvis's personal assistant the next morning. Elvis had driven through the night from Nashville, where he'd been recording, to spend Tommy's final hours sitting quietly in the hospital corridor. He never announced his presence, never sought recognition, he simply wanted to be there, playing his acoustic guitar softly outside Tommy's room until the boy passed peacefully. The legacy of that March night in 1974 continues today. The Mid-South Coliseum displays a plaque commemorating the evening when the king showed his heart was bigger than his crown. The Tommy Mitchell Music Foundation has provided instruments to over 10,000 sick children, and every guitar they give away comes with a small card that reads, "Music heals. Kindness matters. Love endures." Elvis Presley died 3 years after that concert, but the ripple effects of his compassion for one young soldier and his dying brother continue to spread. In a world that often celebrates fame for its own sake, Elvis showed that true greatness comes from recognizing the humanity in others and acting on it, even when the cameras are rolling and thousands are watching. James Mitchell, now in his 70s, still has that scarf. He's never washed it, never displayed it publicly, never sold it despite offers of hundreds of thousands of dollars. It remains folded in a simple wooden box, alongside the last photo ever taken of Tommy holding Elvis's guitar. People ask me if I ever regretted spending my last $20 on that concert ticket, James says today. But that $20 didn't just buy me a ticket to a show. It bought my brother his last moments of pure happiness, and it showed me that even in our darkest times, there are angels walking among us. Sometimes they just happen to wear white jumpsuits and play music that makes the world a little brighter. Subscribe and share this story if you believe that one moment of kindness can change everything, because the world needs more people like Elvis, and more people like Tommy, who remind us that love and music can triumph even over death itself.